The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sine Institute's Fellow Seminar today. My name is Sydney Goff, and I am the lead student associate for Sine Fellow Ambassador Tom Nides. On behalf of the Sine Institute and myself, we are so pleased to have you join us for this event. The Sine Institute is a laboratory for university-wide collaboration and an incubator for policy innovation, convening the best and the brightest in the public, private, academic, nonprofit sectors, as well as journalism. The Institute is where the brightest minds engage to promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. It is where American University comes to convene, collaborate, and communicate. Today, we are honored to have our fellow, Ambassador Tom Nides, join us. Thomas Nides was confirmed as the U.S. Ambassador to Israel on November 3rd, 2021, and was most recently announced as Vice Chairman of Strategy and Climate Relations at Blackstone. A distinguished public servant as well as a business leader, Nides was the U.S. State Department's Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources from 2010 to 2013. Earlier, Mr. Nides was Morgan Stanley's Chief Administrative Officer, Chief Operating Officer, and Secretary of the Board, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Burrs & Marsteller in New York, and the Chief Administrative Officer of Credit Suisse First Boston and Washington, D.C. He also served as the Senior Vice President of Fannie Mae in Washington from 1998 to 2001. Mr. Nides presented his credentials to President Isaac Herzog, who accepted them on December 5th of 2021. Ambassador Nides has joined us on virtually with his guest, George Salem. George Salem is a highly regarded legal expert on labor issues and the Middle East. In 2022, Mr. Salem was appointed by the Biden administration's USAID administrator as the inaugural board chair of the Partnership for Peace Fund Advisory Board, a bipartisan board established by Congress pursuant to the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act. Mr. Salem co-founded the Arab American Institute in 1985 and currently serves as its chairman, and has served as a treasurer of the United Palestinian Appeal Incorporated since 1982. He's a past president of the National Association of Arab Americans and has served on the board of directors of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. In 2003, he was named to the U.S. Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy's advisory group on public diplomacy in the Arab and Muslim world, which was assembled at the request of Congress to study the State Department's public diplomacy efforts in these regions. Please welcome Ambassador Nides and George Salem. To start off, I would just like to ask Mr. Salem if he could tell us a little bit about his story and his connection to Palestine. Obviously, what's happening right now is very painful for you and your family. So how does this conflict end in your view?
Thank you, Sydney, and thank the organizers of the Sine Institute. The balanced perspective is one that we all need to achieve, and it's we don't do this often enough of talking with one another to discuss issues of importance to both constituencies. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be with my good friend, Ambassador Tom Nides. I have dealt with just about every U.S. ambassador to Israel for the last 40 years. And I can honestly say Tom Nides has been the best in terms of inclusion of the Palestinian business community, in terms of promoting of U.S.-Palestinian relations, and he continues, even though he has less office, to be a real serious contributor to peace, which is so important in this time. My story is no different than most Palestinians. My parents emigrated after the Nakba in 1948, the year that Israel was created. And we were fortunate in that we were able to come to the United States. And so we started all over in the United States in 48. My family settled in Jacksonville, Florida, because of the similarity of the climate and my grandparents and my parents, they liked the people of the South. They found them more hospitable, more welcoming. I'm first generation. My parents emigrated in 48. I was born a few years after that, and grew up in a very strong ethnic community. We had 13 immediate family members, homes within a 3-block radius every weekend at my grandparents'. It's your typical ethnic American story, particularly first generation. It was a happy childhood, but there was something missing in that, we had family still back in Ramallah. I'm a descendant of the founders of Ramallah. Every person from Ramallah traces their roots as Christian Palestinians back to the creation of Ramallah in the 15th century. So we've been there continuously ever since, and we have family trees that document every generation and everyone that marries within those generations. So I am the beneficiary of a rich history of Palestinian heritage. Tom and I have been working on the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act, which is the promotion of the conditions on the ground for a two-state solution. Work was going extremely well until the 7th of October, and now we're trying to figure out how to best meet the moment. But honestly, I've been reviewing with everyone within the MEPA team in the US government, and good programs continue to take place because the people, the Palestinian people and the Israeli people want peace. They want peaceful coexistence. They want to be able to work together. But unfortunately, the political leadership in Israel right now is not promoting that kind of peaceful coexistence. You see what's happening in Gaza. I don't need to dwell on that. We all watch the news on a daily basis, and it's heartbreaking. I have so many close friends who've lost family members in Gaza. I am close to the business leaders in Palestine, where the economy has been devastated. The Israelis won't release the Palestinian tax revenues to the Palestinian Authority, so civil servants can't be paid, which means there's real hunger and there's real calamity in the West Bank as well. Nothing compared to Gaza, of course, but the situation on the ground is desperate. We have been working so hard to get humanitarian assistance in the charity I'm involved with, and other Palestinian-related charities like ANIRA, United Palestinian Appeal, Jose Andreas, who's working with us and is bringing the barges in and has been feeding people in Rafah since the very beginning of the conflict. But it's not enough. I mean, you have children starving, which Gaza before the 7th of October was self-sustainable when it came to food production. They're a very agrarian economy. They fed themselves in excess and actually exported food when they were allowed to. And now you've got hunger with people eating weeds and anything they can get their hands on. And it's inexcusable.
All right, Mr.
And the last part of your question was, how does this end?
Yes.
I think it has to end in a two-state solution. It has to end with a path whereby the Palestinians can live in peace and dignity in their own state, on internationally recognized borders along the lines of UN resolutions 242 and 338, with East Jerusalem as its capital, and that the United States, as part of a Saudi normalization deal, recognizes an independent sovereign state of Palestine as part of the package and helps get it on its feet, and the UN admits the state of Palestine as a full member state into the United Nations. Then we can start the process of rebuilding and developing closer relations with the Israelis and the Jordanians and the Egyptians, all three neighbors.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Salem. Mr. Ambassador, clearly you're no longer in Israel, but you were there just last week. Can you help us to kind of understand what's going on there right now?
Yeah, first of all, thank all of you, my student advisors, as they like to say. Thank you guys for doing the work. I appreciate it very much. And Amy, I appreciate your help as the director of the Sine Institute. And to my friend, George Salem. I think one thing, I think if there's no other message that comes out of this discussion for the next hour, it's to show people, especially young people, that you can actually have very different backgrounds, as George and I have some different beliefs, not all. You'll find George and I agreeing on more things than we disagree with, but coming from very different backgrounds and still being able to have a civil conversation. Okay, again, this is not a civil situation, clearly, because of the emotional issue of the Israelis that have been killed, the Palestinians that are being killed. So this is an emotional, gut creating, sad for everyone involved. And I think it's important for those who feel strongly about this vis-a-vis on the Israeli Jewish side, or the Palestinian kids who are watching this, or anyone in between, just to understand you can actually have conversations with people and have civil, civil dialogue and discourse to try to lead to the bottom of things as best we can. I just got back. I've been there a couple of times since October 7th. I think people should need to understand a couple of things. The country is hurting in a way that I have never seen before. Hamas did something that hasn't happened since 1947, which is basically unified the Israeli people. I mean, the country has always been dramatically divided on all sorts of issues. In fact, I spent half my time in Israel fighting with different parts of the Israeli factions about different politics and policies around Netanyahu and not Netanyahu. But the October 7th, the catastrophe on October 7th, where 1,400 Israeli, and by the way, a lot of kids, people are watching this. We're at a concert. Seeing a concert at the Gaza border, just having fun, getting high, listening to music, and they got butchered and raped and killed. And, I can't, and then kidnapped and brought to Gaza, mothers and fathers and kids and sexually abused. It would happen on October 7th. It would be like if 350 million Americans, if you knew 350 million Americans, that everyone knew someone who died in the Twin Towers in 9/11. That's what Israel is going through. Every single Israeli has someone that they know that was either killed on October 7th and or has obviously served up the army, because they've all been called up into reserve. So the country is reeling of what happened. So ultimately, the Israelis, and by the way, I just want to be clear, my personal view is, Hamas knew what was going to happen if they did this, right? They knew the reaction of the Israelis, because they're going to have to react. And in my view, in my humble view, Hamas really doesn't give a crap about the Palestinian people per se, because they're using them as human shields, and there's the leadership sitting in the tunnel, and they're watching, and they'll say, the leadership of Hamas will say, listen, this is about the destruction of the state of Israel. This is not, as George pointed out, a debate about a two-state solution. It's about destruction of Israel. And so, I want to make sure people understand what Hamas is and isn't. They're not the Palestinian Authority. In fact, the Palestinian Authority doesn't like Hamas. In fact, hates Hamas. So people need to understand Hamas is a terrorist organization. Okay. We all, for me and for many people, understand that. But what's going on now in Gaza, no one can like what's happening. And any of us, I'm a liberal Jewish kid from Minnesota. It breaks my heart to see innocent Gazans, kids, adults, families being destroyed and killed. None of us want to see this happening. And obviously it has to come to an end. And my hope is that the first step is to get these hostages out. I've been talking to the hostage families every day. And when you talk to a father or a mother or a grandmother's grandkid is in Gaza in some tunnel, and they're trying to get their kid out. So we got to first get a hostage deal of some sort, okay? And that's really up to the Hamas and Israel to agree to some swap. And the moment that happens, my hope and prayer that we'll get into a ceasefire, will be a particular period of time of calm, and then we can surge in humanitarian aid. Listen, I think Israel has not done everything they can on humanitarian aid. Quite the opposite. I think they do more and more and more. Before we went on the camera, George, we're talking back and forth, and between USAID and all the organizations and all the groups that are out there, we need to do more. Israel needs to do more. Because people are starving and they're dying, and it's not good. Certainly not good for the Gazans. It's not good for Israel. It's not good for the Palestinian people. It's not good for humanity. But we got to get the hostages out. And by the way, we have to destroy Hamas, because Hamas wants to test the theory about what they can and can't do. So I went there. I spent a lot of time with the leadership. I spent time with the hostage families. I spent time just trying to understand how we can get out of this. I have a friend of mine who's the current ambassador in Japan, who likes to say, never waste, a crisis go to waste. Never let a crisis go to waste, meaning this is a crisis and we must not let it go to waste, meaning something hopefully good can come out of this. And as George pointed out, George and I totally concur on this. At the end of the day, the only real answer is, over the long haul, is have a two-state solution. And as George and I both know, there's 7 million Palestinians and there's 7 million Jews. The Jews aren't going anywhere, and nor are the Palestinians. So we need to figure this out and work together, because at the end of the day, we can't have this keep going on, because it's the people who can least afford it, who can least defend themselves, who are the ones who get killed. And they're the ones who are living in terrible conditions. So we have a responsibility to out of this crisis, something potentially, hopefully more positive comes out of it.
Thank you. So I think that we've seen a lot of international response, especially from students my age, college students, and as American is the most politically active campus in the United States. A lot of that I've seen on my own college campus. With students feeling that this response of killing 30,000 women, children, civilians in Gaza is kind of a disproportionate response to the tragedy that happened on October 7th. Do you think that the response that Israel has had to this attack is kind of creating a culture of hostility in a new generation towards Israel? I think that's for both of you. Ambassador, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, listen, I would be lying to say to you, oh my God, no, of course not. That's not true. No, God, that'd be ridiculous. I can't say that, of course. I mean, the reality is, in a war, proportionality is something that we all have to talk about. I think it is, there's no question. A lot of people, innocent people, have died because of this. How we got here, what happened, we can have a lot of conversations about this, but there's no question, we got to do we got to do something on the humanitarian stuff immediately. We got to get to a ceasefire that is lasting. We got to figure out what comes after this. But, listen, you can't be a human being, okay? And I listen, my own kids, okay, I've got a 29-year-old and a 25-year-old. I've had many conversations with them about what's going on there. It's very hard to, I'm not, and when people, I've had events where, Palestinian kids and not Palestinian, protest, I'm totally fine with it. They should have every right to talk about how much they care about this, and it's important for people to understand it. We all are, our hearts are going out to all the victims, by the way. As I said to you, the brutality of Hamas and what they did to Israeli and little kids and girls, and the rape and the mutilation that they did to people is horrendous and hellacious. And I know George shares with me that. But at the same time, I'm also a human being to understand that there's a lot of innocent people that are not Hamas fighters who are dying because of what happened. So, we all, we need to get to this. We need to end this. We need to get a ceasefire. We need to rebuild Gaza. We need to ultimately get the Palestinian Authority involved in rebuilding Gaza and get, real lasting peace, which I agree with George. The only way that's going to happen is some sort of a two-state solution. George?
Well, no one can condone the horror of the 7th of October, or the brutality of the 7th of October. Just as no one can condone the horror and the brutality of what's happening in Gaza today. These are the images that everyone sees. It's very interesting to see how the Palestinian narrative, has become accepted more and more by the younger generations. When I was growing up, if you said you were a Palestinian, people would take 2 steps back because they never met a Palestinian, nor understood anything about us as people. They just thought, we murdered our kids and things of that nature. When I was running the ethnic voters in the Reagan-Bush 1984 campaign, and we created an Arab American committee, the chair of ethnic voters said, "Why don't you say you're Lebanese? It's easier." And I said, "Well, I'm Palestinian. If I were Lebanese, I would say that." This was the mindset. Now people really understand that Israel and the conditions of the occupation are, call it what you want. Apartheid is an appropriate phrase in many parlances. I mean, after all, Salem has called it that. Amnesty International has deemed it to be that. And if Israel could get out of the business of being an occupier, I think then we could go about the business of having conditions on the ground that would promote people dealing with one another from a sense of equality, from a sense of not being subjugated. But the situation now is so bad that we have got to get, as Tom says, we have got to get the hostages released. We've got to get a ceasefire in place. We desperately need to get so much humanitarian. There were 500 trucks coming into Gaza a day before the 7th of October. That's trickled down to a fraction of that. And so we've got to get the deficit made up with additional trucks of food, and we have to get much more assistance and medical supplies in. One of the charities I co-founded, United Palestinian Appeal, has 100 million in medical supplies waiting to get in. We can't get them in. They're with the Jordanian army waiting for the Israelis to allow us in. So much about this boggles the mind, but we've got to get past this so that we can get about the business of saving lives and promoting peace.
I think listen, and I think George obviously made some good points. I want to be clear though, and I think listen, I was the American ambassador to Israel, so I want to be clear about the importance of, for people to understand how, from Israel's perspective, and again, I think it's important to understand this, Israel is surrounded by their enemies, okay? Make no mistake, as powerful as Israel is, or perceived to be, you have Hamas, who is a terrorist organization recognized by the world as a terrorist organization, who his goal is the destruction of the state of Israel. You have many of the Palestinians who live in the West Bank still don't believe that Israel has a right to exist, and we could debate all of that in discussion. You've got Lebanon, you got Syria, and you have Iran. Okay, and it would be like if you live in the District of Columbia, which many of your students are seeing here, it would be like the people in Maryland and in Virginia basically decide that you shouldn't exist. So Israel is living in this really, really crappy neighborhood. Okay, a really crappy neighborhood. And yes, they're powerful, and yes, they're tough, but shows you how vulnerable they are, which just showed you what happened. The worst terrorist attack since the Holocaust, the single biggest day of Jewish death since the Holocaust, happened on October 7th. So I think it's hard for people to understand because they see this tough aggressive, country with its Air Force and its army and its security, but it's a pretty vulnerable little country. As George knows, you can go from the north and the south, the whole country, length of the whole country in less than a couple hours. I mean, this is what Israel is, and as we all know, Israel was established partially because there was nowhere for the Jews to go, and as you know, they were after the Holocaust. That's where ultimately the Jews fled to, and I think people need to understand this is a country that is constantly has been at war through its 75 years of anniversary of their existence. So and George and I agree on a lot of stuff. But I want to be clear though, that the story of the state of Israel in the innovation, and I think, and as George knows better than anyone, there's 9 million people who live in Israel. 9 million people. Of the 9 million, 2 million are non-Jews. Most of them consider themselves Palestinian, Arabs, East Jerusalemites, non-Jews, and they work side by side with Israelis every day in the hospitals, in the stores, in the communities, and they coexist. And we talk about this in a relatively, and George and I have had this conversation about the ability for Palestinians to work in Israel. And George and I come from the school it's all about economic independence. We've got to build up the Palestinian Authority. We got to build up the lives of average Palestinians to feel good about what they're doing and their technology and operation, all the things that I care deeply about, because it makes not only the life of the Palestinians better, but also makes Israel safer. Now, we've had a massive setback on that after October 7th. And I just, as a person, I will say that Hamas wanted this to happen. The Hamas, this terrorist organization, wanted chaos, and they got it, okay? I don't think they ever thought they could be as successful as they have been, but they wanted chaos, and they wanted to create a regional war. And they were almost close to doing it, They were pretty close to creating a regional, meaning having Hezbollah and Iran also attack Israel. So if you attack Israel from the north and you attack Israel from the south, Israel has a very hard time defending itself. So again, these are complicated, but again, what I care deeply about is the humanitarian or the humanity part of this. And a lot of people have died and are suffering. And that's what we got to work on.
I agree, Tom, very much with a lot of what you said. I think it's very important for everyone to understand the Israeli narrative, which I think you articulate extremely well. I think it's important for Palestinians, particularly, to understand the Israeli narrative. It is equally important, I think, that everyone, including Israelis, understand the Palestinian narrative. Yes, we were expelled from our homes. You were either in camps or we're in the diaspora throughout the world. And not only did we survive, we thrived. But that's our narrative, and that needs to be understood and respected by everyone. Up until recently, the Israeli narrative was the only thing that people understood. It was the only thing in the public discourse. Now, I think with the suffering in Gaza, God help us, there's an understanding of the victimization. No one condones what Hamas did. However, 90% of the original targets of the Israelis were civilian. They were attacking apartment buildings where people lived, UNRWA schools where people studied and taught, on and on and on. There are the military targets and there are the civilian targets. And it's as if, Israel was so upset and wanted so badly to get revenge that they wanted the people to suffer. Now, I know you don't condone that, but, that's part of this whole conversation and part of where we are right now in connection with everything. So I think we have to keep all of that in mind as we have this conversation.
So I think as we kind of move forward in this conversation, there's been a lot of talk about a two-state solution, which I think is generally accepted as kind of what will be the end result of this conflict, or what should be the end result. Mr. Salem, you've spent most of your career working on economic empowerment for Palestinians as a means of bettering, which the ambassador kind of said was what he views as the best way to kind of rebuild from this. If you could just elaborate a little bit on how you do that in your professional work, and whether or not that is actually going to be helpful without a two-state solution, and whether or not you think a two-state solution is actually something that's feasible right now where we are in this conflict, or whether or not you think it's something that will be feasible in the near future.
Oh, I think a two-state solution is not only feasible now, it's incredibly important that you give a political horizon to both peoples and to the world as we try to work our way through this. But in terms of the economic, political empowerment of the Palestinian people, it has many aspects. Jim Zogby and I co-created the Arab American Institute in 1984. And that was, the whole purpose of it was to have Arab Americans recognized as a viable ethnic political constituency, and a respected one. We're seeing that now, 40 years later. But it took about 4 decades to get to the point where people recognize that we vote. And unfortunately, it took the uncommitted movement in Michigan to really get their attention, and some polling after the 7th of October. Having space for the Palestinian narrative, as we were just discussing, to be understood, not necessarily embraced, but understood. And just as is important to understand the Israeli narrative is very important. One of the most important things we did for economic empowerment of the Palestinians is the Middle East Investment Initiative. About 15 years ago, a group of us, many of us lawyers at DLA Piper, led by Burl Bernhardt, created MEII, which was designed to provide loan guarantees in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem for Palestinians. We were funded initially with $218 million from OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which is today the DFC, Development Finance Corporation. And we had to train the bankers how to lend because Palestine didn't have a lending culture. We had to teach the borrowers how to do a balance sheet and how to borrow. But today, you have over $500 million that has been lent and repaid under that facility. You have created 40 to 50,000 good-paying jobs in all 3 jurisdictions, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. And we have been working diligently on expanding that program. The MEPA program, the board of which I chair, as Ambassador Nides mentioned, is expanding that by $150 million for MEII. It's also giving a similar $80 million facility to the Bank of Palestine. So you've got providing the wherewithal for the business community to thrive. Second is we've been doing a lot of training. We're training thousands of coders, both within Israel, the disadvantaged communities in Israel, particularly in East Jerusalem, as well as in the West Bank. And we were in Gaza, but it obviously is not possible now in Gaza, but God willing, it will be again someday soon. There has been a deliberate program to bring the Palestinian diaspora back investing in Palestine. Those of us like myself who are first generation, our kids have traveled there. They travel there for vacations and to reconnect with their roots, and through programs much like Birthright that the Israelis do, but not nearly as sophisticated. And they're connected. But my theory is that if you have a financial connection through investment in Palestine, in addition to having land, if you're fortunate enough to own land there, then that is a way to continue the connection. But let's be clear. We have been doing it without a two-state solution. And it's working, but in order for it to really succeed, you have to have all of these political issues resolved, such as the release of Area C, which is about 2/3 of what was committed to the Palestinians as a result of the Oslo Accords. It hasn't been released by the Israelis yet, but if we could develop that and have the industry there expand, if the economy could be given an opportunity to grow without the constraints of occupation, then within 10 to 20 years, we will be self-sufficient such that no economic international assistance will be necessary. Many economists say that because we're resilient people. We built the Gulf after all. But you really have to have the kind of political horizon and the expansion of programs like the MEPA program that Tom and I are so supportive of and have been involved in.
Just a record, you can see how the economic will help because you can see George's gold curtains behind him, and I'm at a plain wall, so you can just tell that. Let me just
Nides could buy and sell me in 10 minutes.
Oh yeah, okay. So let me just talk to you. Let me just say
he projects poverty. You know?
Okay, let's just say a couple of things. So I think it is the goal here, obviously, ultimately, has been for a long period of time a two-state solution. Well, let's not kid ourselves, guys. This is really, really complicated to get done. And I think obviously we got to stop this war. We got to get the hostages out. We got to rebuild Gaza. We got to get a reformed PA. There's a lot of things we got to do, and we have to have a roadmap for the Palestinian people to believe that there is hope. And that's something that I talked about a lot when I was in Israel, and I talked a lot about it now that I'm not in Israel and what that looks like. Listen, President Bush, 41 and 43, and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and even Donald Trump, everyone's talked about this, and nothing ever seems to happen, right? And more settlements get built in the West Bank, making it more difficult for peace. So what I tried to do when I was ambassador working with George was to spend time and energies on the things that I could control, like better healthcare, better schools, 4G, crap that really matters in people's lives. I got Google to come to Israel with my friend Ruth Bratt, who gave $50 million to $40 million of money to go. George, don't leave us. I hope you're coming back. Because I upset him. He's leaving. I don't know. Hopefully he'll come back. But $50 million to actually focus on the importance of training, technology training, which is going to be the difference between success and failure for the Palestinian people. So I think ultimately, what does a two-state solution look like? I have no idea. I go back to this idea that you have you've got 7 million Jews and 7 million, Palestinians living right on top of each other. If any of you guys are on this show have ever been there, they're right on top of each other. And somehow we have to figure out how these people are going to coexist, because we can't keep going down this path. It's insane. It's insanity. And I think as someone who cares deeply about the state of Israel and the importance of the birth of the state of Israel, and as a Jew and as someone who represents the United States, I care deeply about it. But if you're going to want and you care about the security of the state of Israel for the long haul, we've got to figure this out, okay? Because the insanity of just doing the same damn thing over and over again gets to what happened on October 7th, gets to happen what happens in the West Bank, and happens in Israel. I went to every there's called a shiva call, which is you go as someone who goes to someone's house to mourn their loss. And every Israeli and non-Israeli who died in Israel by a terrorist attack, when I was American ambassador, I went to the home of the family within hours of the terrorist attack. Okay, guys, listen, I'm not very good at this. I've never done this before. I don't know. You walk into it and you hold the hand of a mother or a father who just lost their 21-year-old kid to a random shooting or a carjacking where they ran over the kids in Tel Aviv. So yeah, this can't work, okay? And I'm sure George has, dozens and dozens and dozens of friends who have either, had been, hurt in the West Bank, and I'm sure he's got plenty of friends who can tell him unbelievable stories that's going on in Gaza. This can't continue. It can't. So we gotta, and we wrap around the idea of a two-state solution. Listen, there's no one who talks about it more than I do. I also want to make sure we don't lose sight of the things that are in front of us. And programs like George, George is not giving himself enough credit. The MEI, I think that he started, which I may actually end up going on the board. He started this 25 years ago, whenever he started, which was basically the whole idea is to give Palestinians a little cash to start their business, the seed capital, right? It's a loan. You give them the loan and they pay it back at seed capital. Like, that's like the real deal. It's not like, oh, peace and you're going to get the Nobel Prize for that stuff. It's just like changes people's lives. And the MEPA board, I know with all these initials, I don't know what they all call for either, but the MEPA board he's the chairman of right now is a board specifically set up to make Jews and Palestinians work together to make a better society. And I know right now everyone's like, "Oh, you're kidding me? Who wants to talk about that crap when innocent Palestinians are dying in Gaza and Israelis can't move back up to their homes in the north?" But we're going to have to get back to that, and we will get back to that. But it's important we all understand the complexity of this problem, and it's not as simple as some slogan or stop this or stop that or start this or stop that. This is the Middle East. The Middle East by nature is unbelievably complicated. It's thousands and thousands of years of bickering and fighting and stealing each other's territory and claiming different things. It's the Middle East, and it's as painful as it is. That's why programs like George has been chairing and doing and working on the long term is what we got to do.
So as we're talking about a path towards peace, we saw Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer coming out earlier this week and talking about the fact that he thinks that the prime minister is kind of an impediment to peace. Do you agree with him, Ambassador? And if not, like, who's going to help, and how do you think this impacts the hostage situation?
Are you trying to get me in trouble? Okay, listen, here's how I think about it, okay? First of all, Chuck Schumer, most of you don't even know who Chuck Schumer is or watch this, but Chuck Schumer is the Senate Majority Leader. He's a Jewish guy from New York, okay? Chuck Schumer represents, obviously, New York City with a lot of Jewish population. He has been for 50 years has been a pro-Israeli voice about the importance of the independence of Israel and the strength and all its people and its culture. We say it's in his kishkas, it's in his, he loves the place, he cares. So Chuck Schumer has a lot of room, in my view, to say whatever the hell he wants to say. And if Chuck Schumer wants to go to the Senate floor and articulate his love for the state of Israel, which he did, and the importance of getting rid of Hamas, which he did, but if he wants to articulate his views about the current government, he has every right to do it, okay? Now, at the end of the day, the Israeli people, it's a democracy, they will decide who their government is, to be clear, okay? The United States isn't going to dictate to a sovereign country, you should put this person or you should put this, and we can't do that. But Chuck Schumer, in my vote, there's no one who cares more about Israel, and for him to articulate that's certainly his prerogative, and obviously, he has an enormous amount of credibility in my mind. Listen, to be clear, this government, put the prime minister aside for one second, put Bibi Netanyahu over here in this little circle. This government that he has are some really people that I wouldn't even meet with when I was ambassador, okay? And that's just the case. I wouldn't do it. And people are like, oh, you got to go meet. One's the Minister of Finance, the other one's the Minister of Security. You got to go meet with them. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just not doing it. And I believe that many members of the government are are not doing what they should be doing on humanitarian, on the issues of the West Bank, on things that I really care about. So is the government, the way the government is formed, do I believe ultimately over the long haul there should be new players in this government? 100%. The Israeli people will decide when that happens, if it happens. But what I like in the future, having a different group of people in this government, personally, I think it would be good for Israel, and it'd be good for humanity. Again, I'm not an Israeli. I don't get to vote, but I think there are clearly people in his government, sadly, that I'm not having dinner with. Okay, and I'm a proud guy. I love the state of Israel, but I'm not breaking bread with these people. But the prime minister himself, Bibi Netanyahu, has done a lot of great things for Israel over time. Right now, we're in a much different place in his leadership, and that's going to be up to the Israeli people to decide when he stays or leaves.
Mr. Salem, kind of on that same vein, if we're talking about a two-state solution and Palestinian autonomy, you see that the leader of Palestine is kind of in his late 80s, and a lot of people are talking about needing reform on that end as well. Do you think that there would need to be kind of reform in the leadership structure that we see there, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the Palestinian people want to see reform, and that's the operative driving force as I see it. I think Abu Mazen, who is the elected leader, granted he was elected in 2005, wants very much to pass it down to a next generation, but he wants it to be in an orderly fashion. There have been impediments to holding elections. Whether or not the Palestinians of East Jerusalem could vote has always been a problematic issue. There have been a number of other, the role of Hamas in an election, which, as Tom mentioned, is a designated terrorist organization, is a question. So there have been a number of issues there. Having said all that, it is critical that there be a reconstituted Palestinian Authority with ministers who are technocrats, not politicians, that the newly selected prime minister go about reconstituting the Palestinian Authority in this vein and begin to administer Gaza in a very clear way. And all of this gearing towards elections and a newly constituted government that is legitimate through elections, hopefully sooner rather than later. One of the issues in the hostage negotiations is whether or not a gentleman by the name of Marwan Barghouti will be released. Marwan Barghouti is a very credible Palestinian leader. He led the first and the second Intifada, has published articles here in the United States in press arguing for a two-state solution, and would have the credibility to be a successor to Abu Mazen. And there was a slate being developed in the last set of elections that involved him and Nasser al-Qudwa, who's a very credible political leader. He was the UN ambassador for the Palestinians a while back. He has a very good political pedigree and is very respected. Both of these men have reputations of being clean financially and not engaging in any corruption, which I know is a rub against the current leadership of the Palestinian Authority. So just as Israel has its work to do, believe me, the Palestinians have a lot of work to do. And there are a number of us that have been arguing very vociferously behind closed doors that we need to make a change in order to win back international support for Palestine so that we can rebuild Gaza, develop it, provide opportunities and shelter and food and everything for the people there that have everything's just been totally destroyed. You have to have a legitimate reconstituted government with credible leadership in order to get the support you need to serve your people well. And elections are a way to do that at the right point, at the right
Yeah,
stage.
listen, it's interesting. As George points out, everyone's got their issues. I mean, listen, Joe Biden thinks a boss is quite young, so that's good because he's only 86. It makes Joe Biden look younger, so that's a big positive. That's a little bit of a humor, but the reality of this is that the Palestinian, because listen, most human beings don't understand how complicated this is. Okay, so because in Gaza, just to be clear, before the war, 16 years ago in Gaza, there was elections and Hamas won the elections in Gaza and basically kicked out the Palestinians. Now you'll say, what do you mean? The PA, the Palestinian Authority was in elections with Hamas. Hamas won. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's what happened. And then, so you go a few miles north and you're now in the West Bank. And the West Bank is governed by the Palestinian Authority. So you've got Hamas in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And guess what? They don't like each other. In fact, they hate each other. And you'll say, well, that makes no sense. They're both sort of Palestinians. Well, that's just the way it works, right? They don't like each other. And not only do they not like each other, that the fear is in the West Bank, before the war, who was really popular in the West Bank? Hamas. Hamas actually was quite popular in the West Bank. And who was really popular in Gaza? The Palestinian Authority. Okay, it's the old story, you want what you can't have. Okay, and so now with Hamas basically being destroyed, okay, there is no question that the Palestinian Authority would like to come back into Gaza and to basically run Gaza. And there's going to be a big fight about that. But I think George is in the same camp and Joe Biden's in the same camp. The only way a future of Gaza must have the Palestinian Authority involved in that. That's going to have to happen. And the Israelis will say, no, you can't do that. The reality of this is I like to say, the fight is not with the Palestinian people. The fight is with extremism and with Hamas. That's where the fight is. And that's where this whole argument's going to go. But at the end of the day, if you'd hope to have some answer to what goes on in Gaza, you're going to have the Palestinian Authority involved. You're going to have a new Palestinian Authority, just like you're probably going to have a new Israeli government to basically do what needs to happen.
And you need to end the occupation, if I could just add to what Tom said, which I agree with. You have to end the occupation or
I
have...
don't really refer to the record. I don't usually use the word occupation, but I'll let George use the word.
Call it what you want.
Okay, whatever.
It's the subjugation of the Palestinian people.
Okay. This is when the wheels start coming off this bus, so we're gonna have to...
All right. So while we're kind of talking about these elections that we have going on, as we're looking at the United States and the fact that we have a national presidential election going on here coming up in a few months, do either of you think that the presence of that election is going to kind of continue to polarize this issue more for Americans generally?
Well, listen, to be clear, I don't think, to George's perspective, I don't think anyone expected this issue to become as big an issue as it's been. I mean, listen, most Americans don't understand the issue, just to be clear. And the reality is this, and quite frankly, this has galvanized younger voters in a way that I think has surprised the administration. I've obviously been quite close to the administration, so I think this issue has become clearly a much bigger issue than anyone anticipated. And so I think, has that affected our thinking on this? I'd be lying to you if I told you not. I mean, if I said, no one cares about the election and let the car, that's bullshit. I'm not going to tell you that because you'd all think I was liars. So the reality of this is, sure, it has impact. George talked about that group of voters in Michigan who voted uncommitted to send a message in Michigan. Joe Biden can't win without Michigan. But what I appeal to people is that we will get through this. We will get through this, and hopefully we'll get a ceasefire and something will come out of the other end. But and again, this is not a political advertisement. When young people sit around and say, oh my God, this is hellacious and we can, and this is terrible, and we're not going to support Joe Biden. I just want to remind people what they could wake up and have if they don't have Joe Biden. Okay. I'm no longer in government, so I'm no longer, I can say what I want to say, but if you wake up in the morning and say, I really care about this issue, which I really do care about as well. But if we wake up and have Donald Trump as president, if you think things were bad before, no one has any idea how bad they could be. So yes, this is going to have some impact on the election, no question. And then on the other side, the Republicans will, in fact, again, this is not a partisan comment, but it's just a reality, will try to as Chuck Schumer made his comments in the Senate, the Republicans are going to try to make this, well, I told you that the Democrats are weak on Israel. See, the leader is weak on Israel, which is, of course, ridiculous at its face. But yeah, so the partisan issues will obviously have impact. Everything will be looked through the lens of an election, which is going to have huge impact on your lives and my lives. So yes, everything will be viewed through the lens of election.
I have been demonstrating in support of Palestinian rights since I was in college in the 70s. We would take buses up to Washington, and we would, if we had 10,000, we considered it a huge success. I have participated in the last 2 demonstrations in Washington. The first was 300,000. The second was in excess of 4, closer to 500,000. I can tell you that we, in those demonstrations, it's not just Palestinians. We don't have that many in the Washington metropolitan area. It is young Jewish Americans. It is young American Americans. It is older people of conscience. The Palestinian narrative has become apparent to more and more people. And I think that this administration has begun to recognize that. I don't think they did initially, but I think they've come to appreciate it. And I'm hopeful that it will embolden the president when it comes to dealing with getting humanitarian assistance in, and when it comes to doing the things that are in the U.S. national interest in this regard. But I will agree with Tom on the following point. I'm a lifelong Republican. And the reason I became a Republican is because in 1984, when the Reagan campaign accepted me as a Palestinian to lead the ethnic voters effort for Reagan, the Democratic campaign for President Walter Mondale's campaign rejected the checks of Palestinian and Arab American contributors. That was in 1984. You see how far things have come. The Republican Party has gone far right, and the Democratic Party has embraced us in a major way, particularly in the progressive element. The first Democratic president I ever voted for was Joe Biden, because I couldn't stand the prospect of a Donald Trump. And I do agree with Tom that if the result of all of this, I supported the uncommitted movement because I wanted to send a message. But I do hope those people all come back to the fold and vote in favor of Biden for president. It's not easy. My kids are all today, it's a hard no. We're not, and they all voted for it before because of what is happening. And but people have got to understand the alternative is beyond imagination. You look at the difference in the campaigns, and Joe Biden is a very decent human being. President Trump is defending all these lawsuits and spewing revenge. So I hope we get back to that. But as for the level of college protests, we are a nation that endorses the First Amendment. One of the concerns I had and continue to have, and one of the first things in my first one, and one of the serious meetings with Jake Sullivan that a small group of us Arab American leaders had, was what's happening to Palestinian students and supporters of Palestinian rights on college campuses and law firms and employers generally. And we've, Fortunately, the machinery of government is coming to bear, and you have Harvard and Columbia and other universities being investigated by the Justice Department for discrimination against students for engaging in First Amendment rights. You have the EEOC taking complaints from Palestinian students or Palestinian employees who've been doxxed or fired for their social media posts. It's a dark time as a result of this issue everywhere. And I believe once we see a political horizon, then all of these things will be righted over time. And we can all deal with one another with much less divisiveness. But critical to that is getting Joe Biden reelected, in my judgment.
Perfect. Do you have any other closing comments or anything, just as we're starting to finish up here, Mr. Salem?
No, I mean, I want to thank you guys. This was fun. Of course, if you guys want to ask any questions, I'm available, and I'm sure Ambassador Nides is as well. What's important is one can disagree and not necessarily be disagreeable. There is a balanced perspective on the future of the Middle East, which we can all agree on. Tom Nides and I agree on 90% of what we've discussed today. We disagree on the fringes on some issues, but on all of the fundamental important questions, such as the need for a two-state solution, the need for peaceful coexistence for the people of Israel and Palestine, the need for economic development, and the immediate need for rebuilding Gaza and getting food and medicine in to save the people. We agree on all of that. And we shouldn't let the disagreement on the fringes define the debate. And I think it can be an example to the country right now in terms of their approach to this and other issues.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. I know I speak on behalf of all of the rest of the student associates and everyone else on the call. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. Ambassador Nides, do you have any closing comments?
Well, first, Cindy, thank you. You did a great job moderating. I think you got a real future in this whole game of moderation. It's good. You could be a moderator you should drop out of school and do like a talk show or something. So thank you. George, listen, what George said is 100% right, guys. I mean, listen, again, I said at the beginning, George and I grew up much differently, right? He grew up rich, I grew up poor. So that's a different issue. But
a son of refugees. What are you talking about?
Okay, well, well, again, we'll talk about that later, everybody. But the reality of this is that on a serious note, this is an exceptionally painful time. Okay, it's an exceptionally painful time for Jews who live in Israel, who've just witnessed the single worst terrorist attack in their history. Okay, it is really, really bad for the innocent people that have been kidnapped are sitting in a tunnel somewhere in Gaza, and the parents who have witnessed their kids being brutally mutilated. It's really terrible for all of these innocent kids and adults who've been killed in Gaza. It's really bad for those students on college campuses, Jewish kids who feel like they're being, intimidated, and Palestinian kids who feel like they haven't been heard. And I think we all need to understand everyone is feeling this level of anxiety and anger and frustration. But I just want to say what George said. You can have real disagreements with people, but you got to have dialogue. You got to communicate. You got to understand the perspective the other person's coming to the table, even if you unbelievably disagree with them. And one of the reasons I wanted George to be here is that for me, as someone who, as admires what he's doing, but working together, it just shows that you can actually talk about these issues in a way that's actually important for people to understand and understand maybe we can get through all of this. And out of the end of this, maybe possibly, it would be just a little bit better. So I'm honored to be here. I appreciate all the work everyone did. Thanks for hanging around and listening to us. We'll see you all soon. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. It's Amy Dacey, the Executive Director of the Sine Institute. I'm here with Ambassador Nides, other student associates. We want to thank certainly both of you, gentlemen. It is an honor and a privilege to have you have this conversation. I think we also say at the Sine Institute, it's even more important what we do when we leave these Zooms, when we leave these rooms. We have to keep talking about these issues. We have to keep having constructive dialogue. And we are very excited to welcome Ambassador Nides back to campus on April 18th at 6 p.m. will be his next session. We invite you all. Thank you again. The Sine Institute is looking forward to seeing you at other programs. And gentlemen, I think we all learned a lot. This group's going to talk a little bit longer about this. And I said it's an honor to hear from you and to see you talk through these very complicated issues with us. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.